African Clinical Research Network, ACRN, is a pan-African network headquartered in Harare, Zimbabwe. We offer a single entry point into the African clinical trial landscape. In simple terms, we design trials and we run trials. We work to strengthen the research ecosystems that make high-quality African-led clinical research possible. At our core, we believe Africa should help shape global clinical research and not just be a passive participant. We're launching this podcast at an exciting moment. Since this conversation was recorded, Dr. Tariro Makadzange, the founder and CEO of ACRN, has been recognized on the 2026 Time 100 Health List. This is a reflection of the increasing global recognition of African scientific leadership. But this work has never been about individual recognition. It's about building strong, sustainable, African-led research systems. African-led research does not happen in isolation. It requires active participation in global scientific dialogue while remaining firmly rooted in African institutions and health systems. And that's exactly what this podcast is about. You will notice that today's episode was recorded virtually while Dr. Makadzange was in Seattle, Washington, engaging with global partners at a conference. Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the Africa Clinical Research Network ACRN Podcast. This is a new platform dedicated to Afrocentric perspectives on clinical research, healthcare, innovation, regulation, and policy. My name is Wilfred Gurupira, Site Networks and Partnerships Lead at ACRN. And over this podcast series, we'll be speaking to African and global leaders who are shaping or should be shaping the future of health research on the continent. So this podcast is more than science. It's about equity. It's about economic growth. It's about sovereignty. And it's about Africa's rightful place in the global life sciences ecosystem. And there's no better way to start this series than with a person who leads ACRN and embodies the vision, this vision every day. And so, drum roll, please. I'm honored to be joined by Dr. Tariro Makadzange, amongst many other things. Also, I'll keep it short. She's a physician scientist, a clinical researcher, and CEO of the ACRN. So, Tariro, welcome and thank you for helping us launch what we hope will be a long-running and impactful conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Wilfred. I'm looking forward to this podcast series for ACRN and a chance for us to bring voices together from across the continent that are interested in clinical research, clinical trials, creating the landscape for what we hope will be a catalyst for life sciences industry more broadly on the continent.
Very true. So just going back to the beginning, and we've spoken about an ACRN podcast before, but yes, we're finally doing it. We're launching it. In your view, why is it important for ACRN to launch podcasts now, and what gap do you think the series needs to fill?
Thanks, Wilfred. I think it's important for us to have our conversations be in the public space, and for African voices to be heard. So we're often discussed rather than really being in the lead in driving clinical research and trials and driving science and innovation. Africa is a continent that's rich in science innovation, but very few opportunities for us to talk about that and for us to start to shape the landscape around research. So there are many decisions that fall in this space that affect African populations, African patients, what medicines are developed, how are they dosed, how are they rolled out. All of those are often made using evidence generated elsewhere, then assumed to apply universally. And we know that assumption is sometimes correct, but often is not correct. So it is really important to understand more about genetic diversity, environmental exposure, comorbidities, health systems constraints, and how all of these shape drug safety and effectiveness. We really want these kinds of conversations to take place. And so we really hope that this podcast will be that space for credible Africa-led voices that really sit at that intersection of science, policy, and industry, and go from sort of grievance to really thinking about enterprise contribution solutions for the continent.
Well, sounds like it's a lot to unpack, and it's exciting times ahead. You've often said that as a continent, we don't need more trials. We need better, more relevant trials. And it feels like, from what you said, this podcast will be part of that broader ecosystem building effort.
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely need more trials. We need to increase the volume, but as you said, we need more relevant trials that also help us to grow as a continent. We speak about quite often this 3 to 4% figure, and our ambition to help catalyze bringing it up to 15% of global clinical trials occurring on the continent. That is a critical goal, and that's one thing we're laser focused on. So more trials that are relevant. And ideally, I really hope with time, more trials that are driven locally. We want local industries to be coming to ACRN and our network and our partners to deliver trials as well.
Great. So when I introduced you, I said you wear many hats, and I kept it short for a reason. Otherwise, would have been here the whole day. But I just want us to take a step back. So there's some people who may not be working directly in clinical research and who are wondering what the fuss is about. We're talking about clinical trials all this time. I mean, from your perspective, why does clinical research matter so much, particularly for Africa and its health systems and the society at large?
It's a great question, Wilfred. We talk about it as though everybody understands it, but I often remind folks that, even as a practicing physician, I had no idea how drugs were developed. And for me personally, it really took that exposure to working in industry. I was very familiar with independent scientific research, but not quite as familiar with all of the components that it takes to get a scientific idea, a chemical molecule, all the way through to a product that regulators approve, and that's safe and effective for patients to use. So it is an abstract concept, and we hope through this podcast to also help people understand all of the key components that go into drug development. But clinical research really is the foundation of modern medicine. So every vaccine, every cancer therapy, every hypertension guideline exists because at some point, patients somewhere participated in carefully designed studies that ask fundamental questions such as, does this work? For whom does it work? At what dose does it work? And ultimately, at what cost? And what is the benefit of that treatment? So without clinical research, medicine becomes guesswork. In history, people would put blood-sucking leeches and remove bad humors, et cetera, et cetera. And it's really through clinical research that we develop therapies that we know work. Research is also the basis of trust, right? People trust medicines because they know those medicines were tested rigorously for safety and efficacy or effectiveness. What often gets missed is the difference between extrapolated data and context-specific evidence. So when data is generated in one context, in one population, assuming that it applies everywhere can often introduce some uncertainty. And sometimes that uncertainty is small, sometimes it's not relevant, but sometimes it's not. And when it's not, communities, patients may be affected. And so that's why It's also important globally as we do clinical trials to ensure we have globally diverse populations. Why regulators, FDA, EMA for decades have been requiring that, but also for us as Africans, ensuring that the therapies that we are using have a strong evidence base in our setting.
Earlier you spoke about Africa as a region being absent from some important conversations. We're not at the table in many ways. And so, related to what you've just said, so what happens when Africa or countries and regions are absent from the evidence generation process?
Hmm. Yeah, it's true. When we're absent, then you inherit decisions rather than shape them, right? You need to be part of the process. Not just be at the table, but really be part of the process, part of shaping the future of science and the future of healthcare. When we're not part of the evidence generation process, we adopt guidelines rather than inform them. Would you design a study differently if you were thinking about the local Africa context versus a different context? And so over time, that absence also reinforces dependency. So not only scientifically, but generally. So it is really important that, one is present and is a full contributor to that evidence generation process.
Right. Wow. Yeah. It's interesting that Africa has, this duality of statistics where, high disease burden in many areas. But as you mentioned before, we have a disproportionately small share of the global clinical trial space. And like you said, that exclusion means, things like dependency were left out. So from your perspective, the continent, is Africa's inclusion not just a moral argument, but a scientific and a strategic one as well? Just unpack that a little bit.
Absolutely. Certainly there is a moral argument, but I think the science, the strategy is absolutely a core. From a scientific perspective, Africa matters because of diversity, and diversity does matter. Diversity is what helps us drive science and understanding of human biology. If all of our work is focused on a tiny segment of the global population, then we're making assumptions across populations that may not be relevant. And as you know, Africa has among the greatest human diversity on the planet, and that can influence things like drug metabolism, immune responses, adverse events profile, and this can apply across a broad range of areas, whether it's pharmacogenomics, infectious disease, oncology, and other NCDs. There are also differences in disease presentations that are influenced by a number of factors. So it could be co-infections, it could be malnutrition, it could be environmental exposures, and differences in health systems realities can also affect how interventions may actually work outside of idealized settings. So if we don't study medicines where they will be used, you risk getting things wrong. So from a strategic perspective, I think excluding Africa slows innovation. You can't fully capture human biology if you don't include Africa and African populations. Maybe as a global community, we're missing a multitude of potential innovations, potential understanding of mechanisms of biology, because we just haven't invested in studying Africa and African populations. And from a strategic perspective, doing research or not doing research in Africa can also increase downstream costs, perpetuates fragile health systems that really struggle to absorb new technologies. Whereas if we're part of it right from the beginning, it drives greater innovation, ensures for us as policymakers are deciding on therapeutics, we have good data, good efficacy data, cost effectiveness, understanding data. And as Africa, if we're part of innovative drug therapeutic studies, then we also strengthen our healthcare systems, improve the quality of care, and help shape guidelines locally as well as globally.
Yeah. So that's all well and good, but what if we kind of address the elephant in the room? And this is the perception of Africa as a continent. The way Africa is perceived globally. Uh, we could get into it and kind of spend the next hour into it, but I want us to zone specifically in the perception that as a continent, we're seen primarily as a recruitment location rather than uh, a place that can potentially lead or have research leaders. So, from your perspective and in your experience, what will or what does Africa-led clinical research actually mean in practice? I mean, the practical side of it.
It's a great question. So recruitment location. So recruitment is very important, right? The faster that we can get therapies to patients, the better it is. The more data we have on diverse populations, the better it is in terms of understanding if those therapeutics work. So I think it's really important for Africa to be a key part of the global research community and to showcase where our strengths are. We have regulators that are strengthening. We have great sites and investigators and strong community engagement. So once approvals come through, very often African sites can really demonstrate that recruitment capability and recruitment support. But recruitment is only just a small part of the full process of engaging in clinical research and trials. And I don't just mean that in the operational aspect of recruitment, retention, quality of care that takes place in the context of trials. But the broader landscape is about science and innovation. The reason we do research is we're scientists, we're innovators, we want to bring solutions to patients. So in my mind, Africa-led research means, yes, being part of the global clinical research and trials community and ecosystem and building resilient structures that can support clinical research and trials. But it also means building African science. So African scientists asking the questions, African regulators shaping the standards, the regulatory science, African institutions understanding their data, building their infrastructure, developing their young talent. It means to me partnership. So partnership on an equal footing, where Africa can contribute in a multitude of ways, including intellectually, operationally, and strategically to global science.
So bringing that to what you mentioned earlier, the scientific and strategic imperative, maybe just to look at, and I want to get your perspective, looking at this from a different perspective, which is from the economy side, as you were saying, how would participation in that clinical trials ecosystem connects to economic growth, workforce development within the African continent?
Yeah, so science and innovation is so critical for economic growth. One of the interesting places to watch and observe is the United States between World War I and World War II, and certainly even more post World War II, where the investments in science and technology have been quite remarkable. So, institutions such as the National Institutes of Health were built, National Science Foundation, etc., and really have been the cornerstone of the United States' economic growth. That science and innovation engine, not only in the biological sciences, in the physical sciences, chemistry, mathematics, etc. And countries such as China have studied that and adopted that at an incredible level of focus and level of dedication. And without science and innovation and investing in your scientific talent, there is no way that a country or an economy grows and develops. It's just fundamental to everything, fundamental to agriculture, to mining, to health, to absolutely everything that underpins an economy. So investing in science, technology, innovation should not be buzzwords. It really should be strategic investments that help build multiple sectors of the economy. And we see that for clinical research, and we've chosen as ACRN to really focus on the clinical development aspect. It's an area where we have expertise, and it's an area where we think that countries, governments can make strategic investments and have a good, strong existing base. And clinical research is a gateway for life sciences industry. If you look at China 20, 30 years ago, they weren't as different as where we are, right? And then the government made a concerted effort recognizing that, hey, other countries have really developed by investing in life sciences research. The drug development industry is a huge industry globally. And within that is a clinical development industry. So clinical research, I think of as a gateway industry. It creates high-skilled jobs, clinicians, data scientists, regulators, statisticians, laboratory scientists, but also strong operations. That's one of our focuses as ACRN, really building that operational backbone, that project management, that quality focus, that execution focus. So you start to build a set of muscles and skills that are really critical in this globally competitive world. And it also clinical research anchors infrastructure, so health systems, laboratories, data systems, quality frameworks. And once you establish that, it also can attract downstream investments. So many countries talk about manufacturing. It's much easier to build a strong manufacturing base once you have a life sciences industry, a clinical development industry. You're training young people in a lot of the quality-related processes that are crucial in manufacturing. Similarly, diagnostics, digital health, biotech. And we've seen, and Asian countries have nicely demonstrated this, that countries that invest in research ecosystems don't just improve health outcomes, they build economic resilience and global relevance. You're relevant if you're now the lead in phase 1 trials and making new innovator drugs to treat the diseases that are important in your population. So this is why for us as ACRN, framing research as charity is so limiting. Research is strategy. It's a strategy for economic growth, for development, for healthier populations and healthier communities.
I get the sense that not many clinical trialists and scientists on the continent would think of themselves as strategists, would think of themselves as contributing to actually building the economy of the country. And I think that reframing that the ACRN is bringing is essential, especially to policy makers. But I want to talk about what's coming, and I'm so excited. You've given us a lot to think about, and so in the coming year, we hope this podcast will explore topics ranging from regulation, pharmacogenomics, NCDs, industrial policy that you've just introduced, and the strategy. But from your perspective, what should listeners expect from the series? And more critically, who is this series for, this podcast series?
Yeah, thanks. We're excited, and we're hoping we'll invite folks who want to have conversations with us on these key topics. So this series is for policymakers who want evidence-informed decisions. It's for regulators navigating complexity and pressures, timeline, competitiveness pressures, technology, innovation pressures. For researchers who want to build globally relevant science from Africa, and the whole range of researchers, from the bench scientists to the epidemiologists, the whole range of African scientists to the social scientists who understand community dynamics and population dynamics. It's also for funders and industry partners who want to engage seriously with Africa, and for anyone who believes that Africa should be shaping, not just receiving, but should be shaping the future of medicine. So we're hoping for honest conversations, for nuance, for challenging assumptions, including our own assumptions. So we are looking forward to over the course of this year some engaging discussions around these key themes and topics.
Thank you. It feels like, yeah, with you, it feels like we barely scratched the surface, and we need another 2 days to discuss with you. But as we come to the end of this episode, I want to give you an opportunity to kind of think broadly and then to exercise the optimist in you. So here's a scenario. Everything aligns, everything that you've spoken about, all our ducks are in a row. The ACRN achieves exactly what it's supposed to, and Africa fully claims its place in global clinical research over the next decade. What success look like to you if everything that I've just mentioned happens?
Yeah, thanks, Wilfred. I think, as an entrepreneur, you have to be an optimist because this is hard. And it's only by being an optimist, a realistic optimist, that I think some of the innovators in history have helped shape and change perspectives. So I am an optimist, and I am a very strong believer a believer of the continent. I think the continent is punching well below its weight, and really should be coming to the table and contributing to global science and innovation. So to me, success looks like African countries competing for and leading trials. So we're not an afterthought. Everybody is thinking, my next market is in Africa, the fastest growing population on the continent. Am I developing therapies for Africa? Am I including Africans in trials? And that's globally, but also domestically. Domestic innovators also driving clinical research and trials. So for me, when I'm retired, I really would like to look back and say, hey, we created a wave, and African countries are competing for and leading trials. I think success regulatory systems that enable innovation while protecting patients, I think, was such at an exciting turning point for Africa. We really have an opportunity here where others have legacy systems and might struggle to change, adapt. Change management is always a tricky thing. We're starting AMA now. We're starting our regulators. Many of them have come from being small offices in the Ministry of Health to some of them, starting to build out, grow. We've had more countries over the last few years become ML3 regulators. Some of them are competing to become the first ML4 and hopefully soon, strong, stringent regulators. But we're doing all of this at a time where technology is available, where intelligence is an asset and a tool that one can integrate into systems and enable that leapfrogging. So I think, regulatory systems in Africa would be very exciting if we are truly at the cutting edge of using technology to speed up trials, to speed up access to new therapies. There's actually zero reason why all of this takes years, right? How do we leverage technology to make this much more doable for our populations, enable us to access this industry rapidly, but also enable us to be fast beneficiaries of the current technology wave. And also, success looks like research that directly improves clinical care. Good research, good institutions that do research tend to give very high quality care. So can we, by integrating research, directly start to improve quality of care? Success is Africa contributing to global standards, so not simply adopting them, not just taking, standards generated, in capitals elsewhere in the world. Let us start driving and shaping those. And I think it's not aspirational. I think it's really achievable. And I think this is an exciting time for us as Africans to be, doing this kind of work, really capturing the benefits of decreasing costs of technology, easier access to technology, leveraging intelligence as an asset to help us grow and grow more rapidly.
You are an optimist indeed. So, any final words? I'm just thinking if are the key messages that if anyone who's listening into this podcast, what they should absolutely take away, or someone who's just come and scrolled towards the end of the podcast, do you have any final words?
I would just say I think this is achievable. I think Africa being at the forefront of health and innovation is achievable, but it's only achievable if we choose to do it. So that's what I'm hoping as ACRN. Yes, we can encourage investors, sponsors from the global north, etc. But ultimately, it's really us as Africa driving that change. And if we choose to become the next China in drug innovation in 20 years' time, we can definitely do it. I have no doubt that we will do it.
Thank you so much for your time and for these great insights. I think you've set the tone for what this podcast aims to be. I'm really excited, and I love the enthusiasm, the optimism. You truly believe in us as a continent, and I really want to thank you for injecting that that energy. And also thank you to our listeners for joining us on this very first episode of the ACRN podcast. And just to repeat, the series about asking better questions and ensuring Africa is central to the answers. And if you found today's conversation valuable, subscribe, share, and join us for the next episode, where we'll continue unpacking why clinical research matters and how Africa can be it. So until next time, thank you.